Welcome to the Dibley Diaries for this week. This week we're going to be thinking about parties and feasts, and in the thought for the week Jesus is going to give us 2 rules for behaviour at a party. He is going to be the biblical William Hanson talking about etiquette, but we'll come back to that in thought for the week. And I was reflecting this week that actually one of my first ever jobs as a vicar was to organise a party. We're going to come back to that, but I've been thinking about how important it is for us to have parties and festivals as church communities. We've thought about this with patronal festivals, but also how do you host other things which are parties, times where people are just getting together and enjoying themselves and building that kind of community and fellowship. Jesus assumes that there are going to be parties. Jesus loves going to a party. Jesus saves a wedding party. And he speaks all the time in the parables about feasts and what it is. And we have this imagery of the kingdom of heaven as a feast. In your community, what are the feasts and parties which your church community holds or facilitates within the community? How do you support these community building activities, these times when people can get together and remember that the community belongs to each other, to speak to people and to encourage each other in a thing which isn't worship? Jesus went to all these feasts. It's really important, but he also used a lot of feasts and parties in his understanding, in his teaching of parables and what that was as well. So how do we each as church communities live the parable of the feast? How do we do that? How do we welcome people? How are we inclusive in inviting people to join our festivities as a community? How do we do that? Now, it might be that you have a patronal festival supper meal, you might have a harvest supper, you might have lots of different things, or you might have nothing. How do we live out the parable of the feasts that are coming through in the gospel? How do we live that out in our church community? Thought for the week this week is based on Luke chapter 14 verse 1 and then verses 7 to 14, where Jesus is at a party talking about parties, talking about party etiquette and 2 rules for parties, a bit like William Hanson etiquette guide about what to do. Jesus says when you go to a party, don't sit up towards the host in the most important place. Don't make yourself the most important person. Instead, sit further away from the host at a less important place, and then if the host sees you there, the host will move you up the table. So don't go being arrogant. Be humble. Be humble at this feast. And that talks a lot about humility, about how we should behave in church communities, how we should behave at church events, what is that like for us. So that's really important. And then party rule number 2 is if you're having a party, if you're hosting a feast, a banquet, or it says lunch actually in the translation, I don't know if you're holding a luncheon or a banquet, don't only invite people who are going to be able to invite you back. Don't set up a sort of tit for tat. You should invite everyone. You should invite those people who will never be able to host a party, but you should invite them. Now, I love organising parties. I'm not really a particular details person, but give me a party to organise and I'm on it. And I remember one of my first jobs as a vicar was to organise a party in one of the parishes, one of the littler parishes in the benefice where I was working. And my training incumbent said, I want you to organise a party for the Patronal Festival, St Michael and All Angels in September. And I'm like, great. And I'm like, well, what sort of party do you want to have? And he looks a bit blank. I said, well, we could have all sorts of things. We could have ordinary bring and share. We could have a theme party. We could have Skittles, or we could have a pudding party. His face lit up. He said, what's a pudding party? And I'm like, well, you tend to have a little tiny bit later so people can eat something at home if they want to, and then everybody just brings a pudding and you just have pudding. And he was like, is that a thing? And I'm like, yeah, that's a thing. We can do that. It's actually a very easy way to have that sort of party for people. And the party was fantastic. We had youngsters, we had ancient people, we had everybody in between in this small community eating pudding. Honestly, the children had to be kind of held back at some point or given just tiny bits of the pudding. That was possibly the most difficult thing about the party, but it was great. It gathered the community together. People who wouldn't normally eat together were eating together. It was such a super party. It was fantastic. But it was the community gathered together. Everybody had come. Most people had brought a pudding. There wasn't really any hierarchy. It was just so simple. And it's a challenge for us. How, as church communities, do we model what Jesus talks about in all these parables about feasts and all these instructions about parties? How do we live our lives without this kind of hierarchy? You know, when you go to church, where are you going to sit? How close to the front are you going to sit? Does that make you more important or less important? You know, what's happening at a party journey? Some people get invited to parties. Does everybody get invited to parties? Does the ticket price for a party mean that some people won't be able to come? And how do we deal with that as a church community? How do we celebrate together in our lives, in our events, where we are really mirroring this hospitality that God shows and following the instructions that Jesus gives us? And Jesus says, don't be proud at a party. Don't be proud, be humble at a party. And welcome everybody to your parties. Welcome everybody, even those who can in no way pay you back or invite you back. We need, as church communities, to be showing God's hospitality in the way that we party together and that we feast together. The Dibley moment of the week this week is a situation which happened when I was in a very, very cold church building one day, and I could see that people had very, very carefully chosen which pews they were going to sit in. They weren't particularly close to each other, and at the end of the service I asked them, I said, but why did you all sit where you sat in those particular pews? And they said, oh, those are the pews with the double heaters. They are definitely the best places to sit on a cold day. So they had chosen not a seat of honour, but a seat of warmth. Well, that's it for the Dibley Diaries for this week. I pray that you and your village, however large or small, have a really blessed week where you can enjoy feasting all together in community.